So today I am going to be talking about difficult relationships, and that can be our spouse, our kids, our parents, our neighbor, whoever that may be. Now, I got this email from a mom, and I asked her what one of her questions would be that she could get, that she wanted support around. And she said, boundaries with moms who don't respect your rules for your child, or boundaries for unsupportive family members. And I thought this was great because so many of us can relate to this, that there's parents that have different rules and that they look at things differently, and maybe they don't have rules. And when our kids are friends, and I'm going to break it down into two different talks, so to speak, two different answers, because family is a little different from moms dealing with other parents. And then some of what I'm going to share is how we can deal with our kids too when we disagree. So right now I'm just going to talk about moms who don't respect your rules. I have been through this. My kids have had friends that I haven't particularly, when I'm honest, I haven't particularly liked. Their parents have had different rules than I have and have been more lenient, maybe even allowing drinking to go on in their home as long as kids aren't driving. That's a big one, bigger than you would think. And that makes it difficult. And then of course, our kids want to go over to those kids' houses oftentimes, the ones that don't have the rules, because they can kind of do whatever they want there because there's not any rules. So I want to acknowledge that it makes our job as parents difficult when we are swimming against the current and we have boundaries, and even around phones, taking your kid's phone and charging it at night where they have to give over the phone or shut it down by a certain, if that's one of your rules, that's a good example. And maybe you're the best friend of your daughter or your son, it can be on their phone all night if they want to be on. And so they're not being monitored. And that can make it really difficult as well. This gets into what we can control and what can't we control. And I also want to talk about the drama triangle today, which many of you have heard me talk about before. Because what happens, and I'm going to give an example, is my oldest was hanging out with kids that were making poor choices. The wrong crowd, right? The crowd you don't want your kid hanging out with. And I became really resentful and really angry. And I would go to this place in my head where I was building what I call a case around these other parents, because they didn't have rules. And I can't believe they're allowing this to go on in their home. Don't they know what's happening? And I would feel so frustrated. And of course, that is how we feel. I mean, it makes total sense that I felt that way. However, staying in that place of making other parents bad, we have to be curious when we're doing that. We're focusing more on the problem and seeing the parent as the problem or the kids as the problem rather than the solution. And so what happens anytime we're focusing on a problem and we find ourselves continually complaining and building our case, and somebody is so difficult, which is, we're all working on this every single day, most of us. Some days are better than others. So this is a human condition. This is what happens, but we don't want to stay there. And in the moms group that I participate in, that I've been in for 14 years, and it's a leadership group now, but we do work on relationships. That's the work every week. The different moms are working on things where maybe they feel like they're dealing with a friend, a parent that's friends with their kids, and they don't have the same rules, and how frustrating that is dealing with that. Or the mom that is dealing with a parent that is so hypercritical about their parenting, or just critical in general. Or they try to set boundaries with their kids and they're different from their friends, and so their kids are angry. So every group, we're all working on this. So I don't want anybody to hear this as criticism or shaming. We need to work on it. You need to be posting about these things and getting that support that we all need, because it is difficult. And some of our kids are difficult. And so they fall into that category where, oh my gosh, I keep on trying to hold the limits with my kid, and they are just bucking. I'm just constantly just bucking up against that resistance and that opposition, and it's so exhausting, and I'm exhausted. So what I want to support you to do today is to think about what is causing me upset and angst right now. Think about that. Relationships that are just draining and exhausting, where maybe you feel like, poor me, right? When we get into that victim mindset. But then what happens is we start building our case, right? And it's bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And in order to get out of what I talk about, the drama triangle, that's where we feel like a victim. Oftentimes we can go to rescuer, or we're looking for somebody to rescue us, which a lot of times I look to my husband to rescue me. We know enough now where he doesn't always rescue me. I'll be like mad at him. But then what happens is we persecute. So just notice when you're building your case against somebody, and I just had this happen this week, where there was a situation with a trip that I was taking with some high school girlfriends. And I'm not going to go into detail, but some things happened that I just noticed I was really upset about. And I started doing my whole case building against two of my friends. And I was stewing over this. And I was talking to my husband about it. And I was angry about it. And I was frustrated. And I'm like, how can they blah, 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 blah. Right. And I was in that mindset where something was being done to me. I felt attacked. I felt like something was being done to me. So I went into my leadership group and I worked on that, right? To get clear. So we have to kind of get clear. So that's one of the things. When we're dealing with difficult people, we can stay stuck in the problem and stew in our own resentment juices and build that case. Or we can notice when we're doing that. We can say, okay, what am I going to do about this? And how am I going to go about this? But sometimes we really need to process it and complain and vent. And then after we've gotten out, and sometimes when we're in that, we're really not expressing our feelings either. We're complaining. And underneath that complaining, there's lots of feelings. So when I get to usually my sadness or my hurt that's underneath the anger, I feel relief. And that's when I can move in to figuring out, what do I need to do here? So I got very clear on what I needed to do. And then I was able to call each person separately and talk to each one. There was four going, and have a really good conversation with them and share how I was feeling. And it was very it was connecting. Difficult, didn't want to do it, but ended up having the conversation and making a decision about what I was going to do. And it had to do with the trip we were going to take. And And so anyway, there was a lot, there can be a lot of drama, right? And so to get out of that drama, I had to express my feelings in a safe place, get grounded, and think about, how do I take care of myself in this situation? And we have to get to that place where we've vented and gotten it out so we can move into a place of responsibility, being responsible. Because if I had gone in and I had picked up the phone in that moment, now I'm not really a confrontational person. Some of us are more like, hey, right? We tend to lead more with our anger, and that can cause upset. But if I had picked up the phone right away, it wouldn't have gone well. So I had to get out those emotions. And this is true of with our kids. We got to get out those emotions and those feelings in a safe place so we don't leak it out on other people and blame them and take it out on them. So that's why it's so important to express what we're feeling with safe people. Then once we can feel, every client I work with, when I get them to what's really going on and they can feel those emotions and feelings and express them, they feel immediately a release. And I'm like, I know that is the most valuable gift that I can give them. It's not how-tos, which is so often what we want, although that's important, right? We got to figure out what we're going to do after we express. But where it starts is in the expression. And I know maybe you're sitting here and you're like, I don't know, but try it. Think about, how am I feeling? Because when we get caught up in that drama triangle, we're spinning. And how do we get out of it? It's we share how we're feeling, and we ask ourselves, what do I need to do about this? I believe that this is the way that we're meant to live, is to be 100% responsible for how we choose to respond and react. And it can be messy. Relationships are messy. So start by thinking about, how am I feeling? What do I need to do to kind of get that out, those toxins out? When we stuff our feelings, it is toxic. So many studies have been done on that. So if there's any reason to get your emotions out and express in a safe place, it's for that reason too. So once you've done that, then think about, okay, what is really going on with me that I'm having this reactivity? So I had all this reactivity, and I got to a place of, what is the deeper, now I have that yearning sheet. You may not like that word. I call it yearning hunger. Sounds a little woo-woo, but I think it describes it so well. If you can think of a better word, you can tell me. But research has been done on that yearning sheet. And if you're interested in it, it's actually I just gave it to one of the moms in the inner circle yesterday, and it's a great tool to be able to use. And you can use it with your family, because some of our biggest yearnings are like to feel understood, to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel like we matter. So if you grew up in a family where you didn't really feel like you were heard, or you were misunderstood, those are going to be trigger points for you. So I realized, wow, I feel very misunderstood in this situation. But we were texting, and when you text, you can't hear the heart of somebody behind their words. So what was also happening is I was reading what they were texting, and I was actually projecting, what's called projecting, psychologists call projecting, where I was reading it out of my own lens, where when I talked to them live, that was not how they meant it at all. So I was reading into it and putting in my own spin out of my own lens. So that's where we need to pick up the phone and call. If there's a misunderstanding or somebody texts you something, pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, you know what? what did you mean by that? Not what did you mean by that, right? In that accusatory tone, but what did you mean by that? There's somebody in my life, a family member, that is critical. And I would hear things more out of that whenever they would say, not always, but oftentimes when they would say something, I would hear it out of that critical, out of that critical, what do I want to say? I guess like I would just hear it critically. And so I got where what I would do is, and I would be like a deer in headlights. Some of you are like that. Somebody says something to you in the moment, you're like, whoa, and you say nothing. And then you think about it later and you start stewing. Who gets into that where you're stewing and stewing and stewing in those, marinating in those resentful, hurt, angry juices. And maybe what they said to you, they didn't intend it that way at all, but that's the way that you heard it. So that's where it's very helpful to say, what did you, in the moment, like to have little things that you can say, little statements that are going to help you. So one of mine became, what do you mean by that? You check it out. I'm hearing that as criticism. Is that how you meant it? Because how I'm hearing it is, you big fat idiot, I can't believe you did that. They're so harsh, those gremlins in our heads. And then you give the other person a chance to respond to it. And they're like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't mean it that way. I remember my sister-in-law said something to me and I was like, and I sat and I stewed and I was hurt and I was resentful. And so I did go back to her and I said, what did you mean by that? Because I've been sitting here thinking about it and I want to make sure that I didn't misunderstand. And then I told her what I heard. And she's like, I am so glad that you told me that because no, I didn't mean it that way. Now, sometimes somebody does mean it that way, and that's a whole nother Facebook Live, on how to deal with that. But I'll just give you some little tips with that. So let's say they did mean it that way. Then we can say, you know what? I do feel hurt. And I do feel, misunderstood by you. And I just want you to know that. Then you don't have to say anything at all. See, sometimes we think we have to say a lot. And sometimes just saying how we feel can be so helpful. And then the other person has to think about that and sit with that. So a lot of times we don't have to say very much. And oftentimes we say too much. So kind of, I got off a little bit, but kind of bringing it back. We were talking about parents that's rules are very different. So we got to figure out, okay, so it makes our job as parents more difficult. And I realized with my daughter, when she was hanging out with these kids, part of my frustration, and I didn't really realize it at the time, was that it made my job so much harder because I was having to say no. And I was having to set boundaries to her going over to this particular home where it was like you could do whatever you wanted to do, right? There was pot smoking going on, there was drinking going on, and there was no supervision. There wasn't a mom at home and a dad at home. And so I would have to say no. And then she would be very upset. And I was mad that she was upset and I had to deal with it because this parent didn't have any rules, right? And so who relates to that? But what really matters? So we have to set that aside. We have to take that and set it aside so it doesn't consume us and say, okay, what is right for my family? What do I need to do here? What boundaries do I need to set in place? And sometimes we can't control it with our kids. and they can walk out that door the older they are. Some will, some won't. But you can say, here's the thing. I love you. I care about you. I'm uncomfortable with it. And so for now, I'm going to say no. And listen to what they have to say and say, I know, but I've been made aware that there's some things that are going on that I'm very uncomfortable with. And so let's talk about it. And so you have a conversation about whatever that is. And that will bring you into more relationship with your kid because you want to hear from them. You want to hear what they have to say. So then when we can do this, and I'm not saying it's easy, it's messy, but then we're being proactive, and it has less to do with this parent that doesn't have the rules. And it has to do more with what are we going to do? And how are we going to stay on our own side? And then sometimes we need to talk to a parent. Now, this again is we want to build bridges. We don't want to tear them down. And so thinking about stay on your own side. We don't have to make that parent bad that they don't have rules and limits, but we can say, hey, I just wanted to talk to you. You know, I am uncomfortable with this. And this is what I want. If you do X, Y, and Z, can you make sure that, whatever, or you know what, ask. I mean, it's very uncomfortable. Our kids will complain, but I would call and I would say, are you allowing drinking at the party? Where the parent might say, well, I've had this happen. Well, I really can't monitor what everybody's doing. And so then you have a decision to make. And depending upon the age of your kid, it might be, your answers might be different. But then I had to sit with, okay, you know what? Kids are going to be drinking at this party. Now, this is if the kid's older. What are you going to do when that's happening? We have to kind of think about, what do we do? And that's a whole nother conversation. But I think we have to just stay with ourselves and make our needs known. A really good way is, I'm just not comfortable with that. So that's another thing. And then number 3, we also have to say to ourselves, where might I be maybe being? Sometimes with my oldest, I realized she didn't have a lot of brakes in steering. She could be more impulsive. She was difficult to parent at that age. She wanted to go at 180 miles an hour. And that was scary for me because I didn't know what choices she was going to make. And some of you really relate to that. And so what I would do is I would try to control her because I was scared of the choices she might make. And the more that I tried to control her, actually it created more rebellion because she was strong-willed. And what I didn't know at that time was I needed to be talking to her. I needed to hear her heart. I needed to realize that she really wanted to belong. I needed to say something like, you know what, honey, I'm uncomfortable with this. I want to talk about like different things that can happen and about choices and also built her up. Like, you know what? I believe you are capable of making really good choices. I see that you have that wisdom in you. Sometimes, at the time, I might have felt like I was faking it until I made it. But talking to her now is what happened is she always kind of felt like I didn't trust her. Because of that, because I was parenting more out of fear and I was trying to control her, the message I was sending her was like, I don't trust you. And so because of that, she didn't feel trusted. So when she was like, remember, it's that like mirror I say that we hold up. Then what ended up happening is she was like, why not? My mom doesn't trust me. She's holding up that mirror that I'm going to make these decisions. Now, I'm not going to blame myself fully for that, but I believe it. I believe that the more that from my experience, from my training, from parenting my kids, that the more we try to control them, the more that they'll rebel. So what do we need to do? We need to have boundaries. We need to be clear with, this is my expectations and this is what I want. How can we work with this? So what do we do with family members? Okay, so that was dealing with other parents, and just to know that we don't have to defend our position to anybody. That's that feeling misunderstood. Just try as hard as it is to stay grounded with what you believe is best for your kid, because you know your kid better than anybody else. And if you're in doubt and you're having a lot of conflict with your kid, then get support. Reach out to me, get support somewhere else, wherever that is, get support for that so that you can get clear. If there's a lot of disconnect in your relationship and conflict. So be grounded with yourself and clear. So the mom also asked me, unsupportive family. What do you do with unsupportive family? Well, this is a really big one. It's hurtful. It hurts. It's painful. There can be a lot of wounds growing up in a family where you didn't feel seen, you didn't feel understood, you didn't feel cared for. Maybe you felt criticized. Maybe you felt very disconnected. All of these things. I mean, I only listed a handful. And maybe you just felt invisible. That can be another one. And so what happens is that follows us into our adulthood. And these wounds, they're like, I compare them to like exposed nerve endings. And they can get activated, and inflamed, and they're exposed. And so when we feel misunderstood, let's say growing up in a family where you never felt like somebody really got you, or they really wanted to understand how you were feeling, when somebody else in your life comes into your, a family member or anybody, a spouse, one of your kids, and you don't feel understood, or you don't feel like they're listening. Remember, I was talking about my husband, maybe you've heard me talk about, maybe you haven't, that he used to really yell. And I would be like, what the heck, And then I understood after we talked about it that he never felt heard in his family. And it was so true. I mean, he would even to the point where he would say what he wanted for Christmas and what he didn't want. And he would get what he didn't want, what he had said, please, clearly don't get this. And then his mom would still get it. And she was a wonderful woman in so many ways, but we can be a mixed bag. But he'd say, please, no Eddie Bauer. He didn't like Eddie Bauer. She would get him Eddie Bauer. He'd be like, please, this Christmas, don't get me Eddie Bauer. She'd get him Eddie Bauer. And she clearly heard, but she would do what she wanted to do. And so in his family, he was the yeller. Like, he didn't feel heard. And he felt like an only way to get heard was to scream and yell. And then maybe somebody would hear him because he threw a big enough fit. See, so it impacts us, our childhoods and our wounds. And so those kind of things get triggered in our families, our relationships. It is like the lens that we see ourselves, we see the world, when we see other people, because we've got glasses on that were formed. And so maybe if you felt bullied like I was bullied in elementary school and I was bullied in middle school, not in high school, we moved, but my maiden name was Ween. And so when I was in kindergarten, they called me Weiners. And maybe you relate to this. And they would call me Weiners. And I would cry because I thought it was such a dirty word. And there was a bully on the bus, and he just would say Weiners and make fun of me. And he was this big, huge, scary dude. And I would cry. I just was always tenderhearted. And the crying made it worse. And that bully followed me all through. I didn't know how to take care of myself, right? I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to stand up to this bully. And what ended up happening is that followed me. And I remember the popular girls, and I had a stepsister that moved into my home that was the same age as me, and she sat at the popular girls table. They all were like, loved her, and she was so cute. And meanwhile, I had short hair that looked like a Q-tip on the top. It was like totally frizzy. And you know, I have so many stories. But anyway, I won't go off on a tangent. But I thought, what's wrong with me that the popular girls don't want to be my friend? And so that ended up following, it can follow me still, where I might feel like, oh, you know, and then high school, I did everything I could to fit in and belong and be popular. And I felt like I figured it out. And so, but it still can rear its ugly head, especially when I feel like my kids are bullying me or I'm being bullied by somebody. And so I've had to learn those phrases and those things I can do to take care of myself. So anyway, going back, when your family is unsupportive, it's complicated, but I would say boundaries are key. We have to say, how do I take care of myself with difficult people? How do I take care of myself with my family? What boundaries do I need to put in place? My mom, love her dearly. She's a wonderful mom. She gets focused on weight. And she will comment, in the past, she would comment if I look like I gained weight. Or even say, oh, your stomach's hanging over your pants a little bit. And I would look at it through this lens of, okay, maybe that's good feedback. But I also got more in touch with the not liking to hear that and feeling criticized. The more conscious I became, the more I got angry, and I didn't like it. Anger is a good emotion because it points us to what we want and what we don't want and how we need to take care of ourselves. So what I started doing with my mom is I drew a boundary and I said, Mom, I don't want you to comment on my weight anymore. Firm boundary. No more commenting. If my pants look, you know, if I look like I've gained weight, if I look like don't tell me. Then another boundary I had to set is, you know what, don't comment on my hair, you know, unless I ask you, because it didn't feel good. So that's just a little bit of a boundary to set. So I would say, think about how you need to set some boundaries, even though it's scary. Now, people that have poor boundaries, they are going to guilt you when you set a boundary. I have a mom that I know that that has a very difficult parent, and the difficulty is that they're getting older, and they're getting older, and they need them all the time, and they're calling them and come over and fix this and fix that and fix this, and it's complicated, right? Because it's not just about the parent needing them all the time and not thinking about their schedule, right? But it's all the wounds underneath that of not feeling loved or cared for, and then having this parent be so demanding. So it's a complicated situation. So where I like to start with people is like getting to the root and working on the root and flushing it out, and then figuring out what you need to do to set some boundaries to take care of yourself. And the boundaries need to be, set. But sometimes we don't feel like we're ready because it might feel really scary. So that's what we need to be doing too as part of the work. But anyway, I talked to a friend that was having a similar problem, and how she was doing it was she was saying to her mom, I can come over on Fridays from 10 to 12 and I can help you. So she set very specific times she could be available for her mother. And so her mom knew. And so she could keep saying, Mom, remember, I'm going to be over Friday. Well, I need you now. And it was for something that she really didn't need her now. I know, Mom, I know you want me to come over right now and fix it, but I've got a lot going on right now and I'll be over Friday. See, we have to keep repeating it. I'll be over Friday. No, that doesn't work for me. I'll be over Friday. Whatever that your version of it is, do it with your kid. That doesn't work for me to take you to the mall. I can take you Friday. That doesn't work for me to take you here to your friend's house. I'm going to my exercise class. I can take you when I get home. I want to go now. They're going blah, blah, blah. I'm going to my exercise class. I can take you afterwards. See, you don't abandon yourself. So often we abandon ourselves with others. We give them the power. Our kids, whoever it may be, we give our power away and we abandon ourselves. So we have to think about, how do I take care of myself? What am I willing to tolerate, not tolerate? And then to be able to say, that doesn't work for me. Or, you know what, I don't want to talk to you about this anymore. And a lot is coming up now with actually politics and vaccines, and it's so heated. And talking to people about, how do I handle difficult people in my life that are wanting to talk about this wherever you land, right? And it comes from both sides where we can disagree about this stuff. And my mom was having this difficulty with her cousin, who she's so close to. And they both are on opposite sides of the spectrum when it comes to politics. And they were getting in these big fights. And I said, Mom, you love him. Like, you're both so close. You grew up together, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you just set a boundary and say, you know what? I care about you, and I don't want us to talk about politics, because it's just something that is divisive. And I want to hear about how you're doing. Let's not talk about politics. People are not, so many people, I'm always surprised about this, are not consciously aware of how they're creating tension and disconnect in their relationships by talking about those things that aren't connecting. And I remember getting feedback a long time ago from somebody in my leadership group when I was mad at my husband. And he said to me, well, you say you want to connect with your husband, but why are you talking about something that is so disconnecting with him? Maybe you don't really want to connect with him. And that was one of those light bulb moments where I was like, oh, he's right. If I really say I want to connect with my husband and have meaningful, have conversations that are good, why do I keep bringing up this stuff that causes all this, just arguing? And I didn't even realize it. So we have to kind of look at that, like, where am I bringing up these things that just cause arguments? And how can I take care of myself? I think we're caught up in how people are going to respond. It doesn't mean we have to do it meanly. But, it's funny because my daughter that has my daughter that I talk a lot about, she's given me permission to do that. And she has 2 kids, Layla's 6, EJ's 4. And it's so funny because she's been a teacher. She's not a teacher anymore, but she worked with autism kids too, kids that were not autistic, but also autistic. So she taught for like 6 years. And she gives her kids really blunt feedback, and they're little. And she said, that's rude. And I'll be like, oh, wow. And she doesn't say it critically. She just says it very matter of fact. That's rude. And then she doesn't say anything else. And that's not appropriate. Oh, that's not, that's not kind. And and the kids, she just says what she sees. And I've really been struck by that. And I thought, gosh, what good feedback. Just then she doesn't go into any other detail, even for our tweens and teens, like, well, that was rude. And then just drop it, let them sit with it. And then we can make a request too and set that boundary. Like, I don't want you to comment on that anymore. See, that's taking care of ourselves. And if our parents are commenting about our kids, that one mom posted about that painful, hard talk about one of the moms posting about that and getting feedback. Talk about feeling unseen and not heard when you're struggling with a kid that has learning differences or struggling with something, even if they're not struggling with something, but weight, school, attitude, whatever it may be, and your parent throws out a criticism or a dig, not only is it hurtful towards we hurt for our kids if they're on the receiving end of that, but maybe they say it to us and we feel judged and criticized. So it can be a double whammy. So that's where we need to set the boundaries again. Now, I will say what can also be helpful is to say to ourselves, what about what my parent is saying to me is true? Maybe it's not appropriate, they're saying, and it hurts your feelings and it makes you angry and you feel misunderstood and you feel all those things. But maybe they're telling the truth about something and you have shame around it. And so we tend to get defensive and angry. And what I have found that is more effective is actually admitting what is true and saying, you know what, you're right. Their attitude, they can be tough, they can be challenging. And I'm working on it. We're working on it together. We're working on it. Because when we do that, our parent can feel heard because they're expressing a concern. And at the same time, we can validate what's really going on. And that's actually staying on our own side. You're right. Yeah, their attitude, we need an attitude adjustment. It takes and I've talked about this before, but it takes the energy out of it. And it also is staying on our own side. And so there's multiple things that we can do. And also, I don't know if it's possible, but also I think it's good to give our kids language that if that happens, to say, what can they say? Now, maybe that's not going to be effective, but my daughter was very mad at my mom. This is my youngest, because my mom talks, like I said, my mom talks about weight a lot. And she is 85. She goes to exercise class 4 times a week. She's like, you know what? With COVID, it's so upsetting because now I can't do a plank. And I'm like, she's 85. She's a rock star, but she is focused on health and weight. And so that's her thing. So she was commenting, talking, she talks a lot about it, like my pants are tight or whatever. And my daughter, who's very sensitive around weight issues and all of that, and food, sensitive to it, got out of the car. My mom was sitting in the car and we had to run into a store real fast. And she's like, Grandma, it's driving me crazy that she's talking about weight all the time. And I said to her, you know what, just what can you say to her when she's doing that? And I said, can you say, Grandma, you're talking about weight a lot. I don't like talking about weight. You see, so I was giving her some arsenal and, giving her some tools in her toolbox for her to start being able to speak up. And she did, she said, Grandma, and it's taken her, I mean, we're talking 20, 20 years old. And working with her over the years, giving her little things. So to think about, gosh, so that just got, that got said to you. What can you say back when that's happening? And help them to come up with things. A boy followed us one time when we were in Fort Worth, and he wanted my daughter's number. He came up with a friend. She didn't know him, and she gave it to him. And she wasn't comfortable doing that. Now, he was a college student and, and really a nice kid, but he said, hey, can I have your number? You could tell. And I said to her, what could you have said to that? And she said, I could have, she said, I don't know. She couldn't come up with anything. And I said, how about saying, I don't give my number to strangers? She goes, that's a great one. So giving our kids things they can say, because you know what, we don't often think about, we have to be prepared. So a lot of times we look at these things like problems, and they may be problems, right? We see our kids and we say, oh gosh, they lack self-esteem. They're very self-critical, their internal voices, blah, 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 blah. And rather than, okay, this is a skill that they have that's underdeveloped, and this is a problem, right? It's a problem. It's also a skill that's underdeveloped. And what can I do to get my kid the support that they need to strengthen this skill? Also, a big thing I find is that kids that struggle with friendships, it's because they haven't found out what they feel good at doing. And my oldest said, in high school, I never felt like I had something that I was really good at. And her brother played baseball. He was a great baseball player. Her sister sang. She was in plays and musicals. And she never really felt like at that age she found her niche. And looking back, there's many different things she was doing. She was in gymnastics. She was, she took art classes, but she never felt like she found at that age what she was really good at. But now she has, which gives perspective, right? That they can. But I do believe it's good to notice, what does this kid feel? What do they love? What do they feel passionate about doing that you can affirm and cultivate and plug them into those things, so that it's, rather than focusing on those weaknesses, you find strengths to compensate for the weaknesses. And I love that. That was one of the things in my interview with Michelle Borba that she talks so much about, and how we tend to focus on their weaknesses so much, but we want to focus on the weakness less, and we want to compensate for the weakness by finding the strengths. Or if they've got something where they're struggling with self-esteem, finding them the support for that, so that they're going to grow their sense of self, their confidence, and that can be so helpful. Okay, so it's ongoing work, right? And by us doing it, we're teaching our kids how to stand up for themselves and stay on their own side as well. That's what's so powerful. Okay, well, I'll see you later, and have a wonderful weekend, and reach out to me if you need any support at all. Okay, love you, gals.